All last week, Adam Reilly broke down the candidates' stances on the biggest issues in this election. And tonight, on Super Tuesday Eve, with the field narrowed down, he brings us one of the biggest of all, taxes.
It's one of the big ideas of Warren's campaign, a so-called ultra-millionaires tax, 2% on every buck of net worth over $50 million and 6% on net worth over $1 billion. For Warren, it's a way to reduce income inequality and raise $3.75 trillion over 10 years, funding free college and student loan forgiveness and part of Medicare for all. As often happens, Sanders has a similar idea that goes a bit further, a wealth tax that starts at 1% for households worth more than $32 million and reaches 8% if you're worth more than $10 billion. The proceeds, $4.25 trillion over a decade, funding a raft of new social programs and, Sanders vows, cutting the wealth of America's billionaires in half. Billionaire Bloomberg isn't averse to taxing the rich himself, but he would do it a little differently, creating a new 5% surtax on incomes over $5 million, restoring the top income tax to its pre-Trump rate, and hiking the corporate tax rate as well. For the record, even though Biden has some similar proposals, his total revenue from new taxes would only be about half of Bloomberg's. As a pair, the moderates don't make taxation a big part of their pitch. Maybe that's because they still see taxes primarily as a way to pay for new programs, whereas for Warren and Sanders, they're also a way to reshape a society they think is financially out of whack.
Oh, you were there. I'm sorry. I got so excited with the graphics. Adam, thanks. So just to be clear to me, Bloomberg is $5 trillion man. Is that right?
$5 trillion for Bloomberg, 3.2 for Biden.
That's a lot less
than total tax plan. Right. Yeah. Warren and Sanders, the estimates differ, as you know. Different experts come down differently on the total amount, but they're pushing $30 trillion of new taxation.
$30 trillion.
$30 trillion.
Who was the senator? Was it Senator Dirksen said a million here, a million here? Eventually, you're talking real money. Now it's $1 trillion. Whoever it was, I'm not sure. You know, the one thing we didn't have time for. By the way, your reports were great and really helpful. I learned a lot too.
Me too.
We haven't had time for foreign policy. Could you do a really quick rundown? It's going to be anecdotal and factoid-like.
And not necessarily apples to apples, but a couple points from each candidate.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, much quicker than the other candidates, to talk about the downside of U.S. interventionism, not just in Iraq, but also Vietnam, Iran. He also sees climate change as something that could bring together traditional adversaries like the U.S. and China and Russia and others, Iran, maybe all cooperating to solve the challenge of climate change.
Remember he said in 2016 it was the greatest security threat and people ridiculed him?
That's an excellent point.
Times have changed.
Yeah, times have changed a lot.
How about Elizabeth Warren?
Elizabeth Warren has asserted that the Pentagon right now, the Department of Defense, is basically running foreign policy on its own. You can agree or disagree with that. She says it's time to get the Pentagon out of dictating unilaterally foreign policy, and that it is also time, this goes along with that, to cut the defense budget, which is a proposal of Sanders as well. They want a net reduction in defense.
How about Joe Biden? Obviously, he's been dealing with this for a long time. I mean, just Steve Kerrigan was talking about why Obama picked him, and he picked him in part not only to satisfy the so-called establishment, but also because of his foreign policy experience, which Obama had very little of.
Yeah, and remember, he's had to defend himself on this in the course of this campaign.
He's
had to explain the Iraq vote. He's also broken from Obama. You know, he doesn't want to leave any daylight between him and the former president. Before you email at home, by the way, I know he's still technically the president. Doesn't want to leave any daylight between him and Obama, but he has said that he spoke out against the Afghanistan surge and that Obama did not take his advice. Biden wants to form hold a, I got to check my notes here. It's harder when you're not reading off a prompter. Global Democracy Summit in year one. Like everyone else, he talks about strengthening our ties with traditional allies. He's the only one who wants to hold a summit, and he has promised to put international women's issues at the forefront.
And I'm embarrassed to say the only thing I know about Bloomberg is he made a comment about President Xi at one of the debates, I think the last debate.
Yeah, you stole my thunder there with the first one, which is, no, it's totally fine, which is a real eyebrow raiser when you think about it. He said that Xi Jinping is not a dictator, which I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone on the Republican side or Democratic side who would agree with that. He also says defense spending that I talked about earlier, Sanders and Warren want to cut it. Bloomberg, like Biden, thinks it's about where it should be.
We call it speed foreign policy. Adam, it was excellent. Thanks. The whole series was great. And you can find all of Adam's reports this week on a whole spectrum of issues, where the candidates stand on them: healthcare, immigration, the environment, education, and taxes. They're all at greaterboston.org.